At 29, Mara Ellison was a solitary mother with her 5-year-old son, Toby, clinging to her skirts, and by the time the last light thinned over Juniper Crossing she had nowhere left in the world to take him but into the November cold. Landlord Ezekiel Pruitt had thrown them out that morning because 2 months of rent had gone unpaid after the silver crash emptied the town's pockets and Mara's washing work withered to almost nothing. All she had left, after selling her wedding quilt, her frying pan, and the little cedar chest her husband had built before he died, was a single 50-cent piece pressed warm in her palm. At the tax auction, while men laughed into their collars and women shook their heads at her ruin, she used that lone $50 to buy an abandoned cabin beyond the freight road, a sagging shack so rotten even the clerk called it fit only for owls and snakes. No one there guessed that beneath its warped floorboards slept the remains of a lost empire, and that what looked like the cheapest mistake in town would one day feed hungry families, shame the greedy, and restore the life of Juniper Crossing itself. Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Mara Ellison. That if you are listening from a place that feels forgotten, tell us in the comments. Before the wind made a hard woman of her, Mara had been gentle in the way some frontier people are gentle, not soft, but careful with breakable things. She had been born in the Arkansas River country and raised among wagon wheels, split staves, and the clean woody smell of shavings curling beneath her father's drawknife. Her father, Amos Bell, made barrels in winter and repaired freight wagons in spring, and because he had no sons and no vanity about it, he taught his daughter the measurements of sound timber, the way wrought hides beneath varnish, the language of hinges, pegs, warped grain, and weight. Her mother, Ruth, stitched samplers and quilts for homesteaders too proud to call their houses bare, and from her Mara learned another sort of reading, the reading of patterns, repetition, symbol, and patient hands. A border could hide a message, her mother used to say. A house tells on itself if you look long enough. Nothing made by people is ever only one thing. When Mara was 19, she married Nathan Ellison, a quiet man with surveyor's eyes and miner's shoulders, who could stand on a ridge, squint into noon, and tell where water meant to go before the water knew it itself. He did not make speeches and he did not promise the moon, which is one reason Mara trusted him. He promised boards underfoot, beans in winter, and a roof that would not leak over a cradle. He kept each promise as long as he lived. They came west to Juniper Crossing in the spring of 1888, when the town still carried the rough hope of a place not yet finished. Freight wagons groaned through its single broad street, or teams clattered past the hotel, and men spoke of new veins in the hills as if silver were an argument God intended the mountains to lose. Nathan found work reading claim maps, checking boundary stakes, and helping lay grade for a flume that never reached completion. Mara took in mending, then washing, then bookkeeping for a feed merchant who discovered, too late for his own comfort, that she could add a column faster than he could lick his pencil. They rented 2 clean rooms behind a seamstress's shop. Toby was born in a spring of red mud and wild plum blossoms, and for a little while the world seemed to have opened its fist. Nathan carved the child a horse from cedar scrap. Mara hemmed tiny shirts from flour sacks. In the evenings, when the stove glowed and the town outside settled into a hush of tired boots and far dogs, Nathan spread survey papers on the table and showed her how lines spoke. This mark is water, this is right-of-way. This is easement. This little square that means almost nothing to most men may one day decide who starves and who eats. That it mattered later that. Mara listened. That it mattered too. That life on the frontier teaches women to love without illusion. She knew luck could turn mean. She knew a town that toasted a man in May might forget his widow by Christmas. Still, there had been goodness enough to steady her. Mrs. Holloway from the bakery slipping Toby a heel of sweet bread, old Dr. Pike refusing payment when the boy had the croup, Nathan's hand at the small of her back as if to say there, that's home, right there, even when home was only rented plaster and a pine table with one short leg. Those little dignities were the true wealth of their early years, and because they were true, their loss later cut all the deeper. The silver panic came to Juniper Crossing like weather no one believed until it touched the skin. Prices dropped, claims closed, payrolls shrank, and suddenly every second storefront held more dust than goods. Men rode out before dawn to chase rumors in other territories. Families who had once ordered coffee by the sack began asking for it by the spoonful. Nathan kept working as he could, picking up odd survey jobs, checking water lines, helping a quarry foreman dispute a boundary along Bramble Creek. Then, in the winter of 1893, while returning from a snowbound camp with 2 other men, he fell through river ice where the current gnawed black beneath the white crust. The others pulled him out, but cold as a patient thief, and by dawn fever had him. He died 3 days later with Mara's hand in his and Toby asleep against her skirt, too young to understand why a strong man could simply stop being reachable. Widowhood did not come to Mara in a noble light. It came as invoices, stale bread, and neighbors who meant well until meaning well became expensive. The merchant she had kept books for closed his doors. Washing work grew scarce because fewer people owned spare shirts, and those who did stretched their coins toward flour and lamp oil first. Mara sold Nathan's compass, though she cried after the man left with it. She sold her extra blankets in March when the nights were still sharp. She patched Toby's boots with leather cut from one of Nathan's old belts and lined his coat with wool taken from her own winter skirt. She never begged. Some called that pride, but it was not pride. It was the last fence a widow can build around her child's dignity when most other fences have been kicked flat. Ezekiel Pruitt, who owned the rooms behind the seamstress's shop and 3 other shabby properties besides, had always smiled the smile of a man who liked debt better than money because debt bowed people. He had been patient so long as he believed Nathan's tools or Mara's labor might yet fill his hand. But by October patience curdled. He began appearing in the alley behind the rooms, tapping his cane against the fence post while Mara wrung shirts in cold water. He reminded her, in a voice of injured righteousness, that sympathy did not keep roofs repaired. He reminded her that other tenants had made inquiries. He reminded her that a woman alone ought to be grateful for any lenience from decent men. When Toby took sick with a chest cough and Mara spent 2 days at his bedside instead of at the wash tubs, Pruitt found his excuse. He came on a morning raw with sleet, stood in the doorway while Toby still burned on the cot, and said he would have no more delays. Rent or removal by nightfall. Mara offered labor, bookkeeping, half now and half after the next laundry run. Pruitt looked at the room as a crow looks at a seed row and said he was not in business to collect promises from widows. By afternoon her quilt, 2 chairs, a crate of dishes, and Nathan's tool roll lay in the alley under a lowering sky while passers-by performed that most frontier cruelty of not quite staring. It is a hard thing, and we should say it plainly, for a child to watch his mother hold her spine straight while the world strips her life into a pile on the mud. Toby did not cry at first. He only held the cedar horse his father had made him and looked from object to object as if he feared even his own name might next be set out for weather. Mara thanked the seamstress for keeping the boy inside during the worst of it, though the woman had done nothing more than any conscience should require. Then Mara bundled what she could into a feed sack, tied the tool roll with cord, counted the coins hidden in her hem, and found that after paying for Toby's cough syrup and a loaf of day-old bread, she possessed one single $half. By dusk she heard, from 2 boys outside the mercantile, that the county clerk meant to clear delinquent properties at the old meeting room the next morning, cabins and sheds nobody wanted, scraps of land nobody trusted. The boys laughed over it, naming broken roofs and rat holes. Mara listened. Her father's lessons had not left her. Land with walls on it, however poor, still began where the wind did not. She spent that night in the back of Mrs. Holloway's bakery with Toby wrapped in flour sacks near the cooling ovens, and before sunrise she walked to the auction with her $half sewn into her glove. The room smelled of wet wool, tobacco, and old paper. Men stood about mostly for sport, warming their boredom against other people's losses. Behind the table sat Silas Crow, the bitter county clerk, a narrow fellow whose spectacles made his eyes seem always to suspect fraud in sunlight itself. He called parcels in a tired nasal drone, scrub lots, collapsed sheds, a mule pen, an acre of wash beyond town. No one bid on the cabin out by Bramble Creek because everyone knew it, or believed they knew it. It had once belonged to some long-dead woman connected with the freight trade, then fallen through disputes, liens, and tax neglect until only the shell remained. Roof sagged. Porch gone. Window glass broken. Stove missing. Snake country, one man muttered. Haunted, another offered, to general amusement. Silas Crow lifted the paper and announced the parcel with boredom sharp as vinegar. Abandoned cabin, former survey lot, edge of Bramble Road, sale to satisfy arrears, minimum 50 cents, Mara heard her own voice before she felt it leave her. 50 cents. The laughter came easily then, because mockery is cheap and often the first luxury of people only a little safer than the one being mocked. Pruitt himself, who had wandered in to enjoy the day, turned from the back wall and grinned as if ruin had begun to entertain him. Silas Crow peered over his spectacles, perhaps hoping another bidder might save him from sealing so ridiculous a bargain, but none came. He struck the table with his stamp and said, with sour ceremony, "Sold." When Mara stepped outside with the paper in her trembling hand, Juniper Crossing looked no kinder than it had an hour before. The street was still mud-ribbed. The false fronts still leaned. Hunger still lived in many kitchens. Yet now she possessed a legal claim to one square of shelter in a world that had tried its best to reduce her to air. She walked with Toby past the last wagon yard and out along Bramble Road where rabbitbrush shivered gold and gray. The cabin stood in a bend of cottonwoods above the creek, small and leaning, its boards silvered by old weather, roof patched with mismatched shingles, chimney cracked at the shoulder. One shutter hung by a single hinge and knocked lightly in the wind like a tired hand asking entry. Toby looked up at it and said, with the solemn bravery children borrow from their mothers, "It is ugly, but it is ours." Inside, ugliness gave way to desolation. Mouse droppings threaded the corners. The floor was layered in dust, feathers, bottle shards, and husks of old papers melted into the planks by damp. Somebody had stripped the stove and shelves years ago. Rain had stained one wall in a dark fan. Yet the place held a stubborn straightness beneath the neglect. The main beams were old-growth timber, hand-hewn. And still sound. The planks, though warped, had been laid by someone who meant them to last. Mara saw that at once. She also saw a stone hearth oddly fine for such a poor structure, built of fitted creek rock with a mason's care uncommon in a mere shack. They spent the afternoon cleaning because work is the first prayer some people know. Mara swept with a branch broom, hauled debris outside, stuffed broken panes with sacking, and used Nathan's tools to brace the loose shutter before dark. Toby carried kindling, lining each stick beside the hearth as if making an offering to order itself. Under a heap of mouse-chewed canvas Mara found an iron kettle without a handle and a brass candlestick green with age. Under the windowsill she found a child's marble, blue as a far lake. These little remnants made the cabin feel less abandoned than paused, as if whoever had once lived there had meant to return by supper and been delayed by years. Night came early under cloud. Mara fed Toby bread softened with creek water and the last of Mrs. Holloway's onion broth in the battered kettle, then wrapped him in both coats near the hearth where she managed, after coaxing sparks from dry splinters, to build a low fire. The cabin answered with groans, settling into itself. Wind scratched the walls. Once, near midnight, a draft rose so suddenly beneath her boots that she looked down. Cold air, not from the window, not from the door. From below, she held the candle low and studied the floorboards before the hearth. There, nearly hidden under grime and one ragged strip of canvas, was a seam too straight to be accidental. Two narrow boards met in a rectangular outline no bigger than a flower chest lid. Someone had planed the edges flush and driven square nails at measured intervals unlike the surrounding floor. Mara fetched Nathan's pry bar from the tool roll. The nails resisted, complained, then yielded one by one with soft shrieks in the stillness. Toby stirred but did not wake. When the panel lifted, stale earth breathed upward, cool and old, carrying a faint mineral scent and another smell harder to place, not decay exactly, but iron and lamp soot and paper long shut away. Beneath the opening lay a short ladder cut into a timber frame descending into black. Mara stared a while, candle trembling in her hand, the flame flattening in the draught. Fear came, naturally enough. So did common sense, which on the frontier often walks arm in arm with fear and does not always win. But then she looked at Toby sleeping under patched wool on the broken hearthstone, and common sense altered its face. A woman with nowhere else to stand has little use for mysteries left untouched beneath her own floor. She tied the candle to a wire hook, wedged the hatch open with the pry bar, and descended. The chamber below was not large, but it was built with intention. Stone walls, dry-laid and tight. A low ceiling of heavy beams blackened by age. Shelves along one side. A narrow desk against the far wall. Dust lay thick enough to remember nothing recent, yet the room had been sealed too well for ruin to destroy it. On the desk sat a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, a brass key tied with faded blue ribbon, and a sampler frame covered in stitched symbols instead of flowers. There were wagons embroidered no bigger than thumbnails, a sheaf of wheat, a lamp, a creek line, 7 stars, and along the border, repeated in dark red thread, little half-circles that looked at first like decoration until Mara thought of coin edges. She carried the ledger upstairs before opening it, unwilling to leave Toby alone even for the length of curiosity. By firelight she unwrapped it and found page after page written in a woman's firm hand. Not household accounts. Freight tallies. Or consignments. Seed purchases. Payroll notations. Water fees. Lumber contracts. Dates reaching back nearly 20 years. At the head of the first intact page stood a name the town still muttered occasionally without knowing what remained of it, Beatrice Vale, not a miner's wife, as gossip preferred to recall her, but proprietor. Founder. Owner of the Vale Provision Company, then the Vale Transit and Supply Ring, then, as the entries expanded across routes and holdings, something far larger than Mara had expected ever to find under a cabin floor. Warehouses at 3 camps. Share in the North Flume. Deed interest in Bramble Creek water rights. Ownership of a quarry spur, a grain shed, 2 wagon teams, a machine shop, and parcels all through Juniper Crossing. The empire had not been a palace. It had been roads, storage, water, fuel, feed, wages, credit, and the plain structures that keep a frontier town from blowing apart into isolated hunger. It had been the hidden skeleton beneath local prosperity, built not in speeches but in voices, and then the entries changed. Panic in the market. Bank pressure. Liens threatened by Fitch Mercantile Bank. Mayor Dunn allied with receivers. Assets to be concealed pending lawful transfer. Trust to be assigned by folio and key. The last pages were partly smudged, as if written in haste. One note appeared twice, underlined both times: let the bearer of House Lot 7 and the Creek office key open the lower vault and execute the restoration. Not for sale. Not for seizure. For the town and its laboring families. Mara read the line 3 times. House Lot 7 was what the county deed, folded beside her on the floorboards, appeared to describe in crabbed clerk's language. The Creek office key lay on the table where she had found it. Her pulse began to climb. The sampler took longer. Here her mother's teachings returned like warm hands laid over hers. The stitched wagons were not decoration but route markers. The wheat indicated storage. The lamp meant waystation. The 7 stars, perhaps the 7 properties in the old company ring. Perhaps the 7 properties in the old company ring. The red half-circles along the border were indeed coin edges, but every 8th one was stitched with slightly darker thread. When Mara counted and mapped them to the pages marked in the ledger margins, they formed a sequence of dates and parcel references. Nathan's voice seemed to breathe at her shoulder. Lines speak, if you know their dialect. For 3 nights Mara worked after Toby slept, candle burning low, ledger open across her knees. By day she patched the roof with scavenged shingles, cleared brush from the path, and traded labor to Mrs. Holloway for flour and tallow. Toby gathered fallen branches and sat on the step, guarding the house with a seriousness that made passing teamsters smile despite themselves. Mara said little in town. The wise keep gold quiet even before they have touched it. The code led not to some fairy tale chamber piled carelessly with bars and gems, but to something more formidable. In the cellar wall, behind a shelf of rotted account boxes, lay a second layer of stone sealed with mortar newer than the rest. The brass key fit an iron escutcheon hidden beneath one loose rock. When she turned it, an inner panel released with a groan of long-silenced metal, revealing a narrow vault no wider than a wardrobe and packed with document cases, canvas-wrapped bundles, 2 locked strongboxes, and a rolled survey map lacquered against damp. Inside the strongboxes were not only gold eagles and silver dollars, though there were enough of those to make Mara sit back on the dirt floor and close her eyes from the force of what they implied, but bearer bonds, stamp certificates, share warrants, and deeds recorded properly then never presented after Beatrice Vale's disappearance. One leather packet held contracts proving that Fitch Mercantile Bank had been creditor, yes, but never lawful owner of the properties it later absorbed through rumor and intimidation. Another held the original charter of the Bramble Cooperative, signed by Teamsters, widows, quarrymen, and farmers, naming Beatrice Vale trustee until transfer to the lawful holder of House Lot 7 upon proof of title and recovery of the vault. A lost empire, then, but not lost to chance. Hidden on purpose until a braver season. If Mara had been a greedier woman, perhaps the story would have soured there. Treasure can make fools faster than hunger can. But she had lived too close to need to mistake possession for purpose. The map showed more than assets. It showed the unfinished flume Nathan had once helped survey, the quarry spur, the cold storage cellar near the old hotel, the boarded machine shop, and parcels where the poorest families in town now rented from men who had done nothing but inherit sham claims. With lawful title and liquid funds, much of Juniper Crossing might breathe again. With those same papers in the wrong hands, it would harden into a company carcass picked clean by the same few names already fattened on decline. News travels on the frontier the way smoke does, finding cracks no matter how carefully one banks the fire. Mara's first mistake was small. She carried one document to Dr. Pike, whose eyesight and decency she trusted, asking only whether the county seal appeared genuine. He confirmed it did, and swore discretion, but his assistant's brother hauled coal to the mayor's office, and by the week's end Horace Fitch himself rode out past the cottonwoods under pretense of checking drainage along Bramble Road. He was a banker with a polished beard and the kind of cuffs a desperate town should have despised on principle. Mayor Abel Dunn came separately the next morning, smiling too widely for the weather, offering sympathy, then surprise at finding the cabin inhabited, then concern that there might be irregularities in the auction listing. Irregularities was the word greedy men use when they smell value they do not control. Mara denied everything because she still possessed the most necessary frontier talent of all, the ability to keep her face from betraying the storm behind it. But Dunn noticed the repaired shutter, the swept path, the confidence with which she stood in the doorway. He noticed too much. 2 days later Silas Crow arrived with a notice stating that an error in parcel classification might render the tax sale reviewable. Reviewable, again, that velvet glove over a thief's hand. Mara took the paper, read it twice, and asked in a voice quiet enough to unsettle him whether the county often reversed sales only after widows made rotten cabins livable. Crow reddened. He told her to attend the hearing 3 mornings hence. That night someone tried the latch after midnight. Mara was awake instantly. Toby slept beside her now on a pallet near the hearth, and one fierce truth moved through her before fear could form words: nobody would take this place while her child breathed under its roof. She lifted Nathan's hammer from beside the bed and stood in darkness as the latch clicked once, twice. Then silence. Then footsteps circling the house, pausing over the section of floor beneath which the cellar lay. A plank creaked outside the wall. Whoever it was knew enough to search. Toby woke and whispered her name. Mara knelt, pressed a finger to his lips, and held him against her until the steps receded toward the brush. By dawn she had decided. Secrecy had carried her far enough. From here she would need truth, witnesses, and the one force stronger than bankers in a dying town, a crowd that realizes its hunger has been arranged. At the hearing room she did not come alone. Mrs. Holloway came in her flour-dusted apron. Dr. Pike came with his spectacles low on his nose. 2 laid-off quarrymen came because Nathan had once helped settle their boundary pay honestly. Even Pruitt came, perhaps hoping to enjoy a fresh humiliation. Mayor Dunn sat at the table with Fitch beside him and Silas Crow sweating over papers. They argued procedural errors, incomplete survey language, the possibility that subsoil rights had not been included in the sale. Mara listened until they finished weaving their net from jargon, and then she laid Beatrice Vale's charter on the table, followed by the deed folio, the bank correspondence, and the original trust assignment naming house lot 7. There are moments in a room when power changes owners without moving its feet. We know such moments by the silence they produce. Crow stopped shuffling. Dunn's mouth remained half open over his next objection and stayed there. Fitch reached for the papers with a speed too telling to hide, but Mara rested her hand on them first and said, for all to hear, that if anyone wished to discuss subsoil rights, unlawful seizures, forged public assumptions of ownership, or attempted intimidation of a lawful title holder and her minor child, she would be glad to continue in the presence of the circuit judge now being sent for by Dr. Pike's assistant. Poor people often know long before the law does when justice has entered the room. Mrs. Holloway began to cry quietly. One quarryman muttered that he had always said Dunn's cousin had no proper claim on the machine shop. Murmurs spread. Names surfaced. Memories connected. A bank arrangement here, a vanished deed there, a receiver's notice posted in a storm nobody had seen until too late. Juniper Crossing, like many towns, had been starved not by fate alone but by tidy theft dressed as bookkeeping. The weeks that followed were not easy, because restoration rarely arrives with the speed of a fairy tale, and even rightful papers must pass through stubborn offices. But now Mara had allies, lawful proof, and enough coin from the strongboxes to hire protection, secure counsel from a territorial attorney in Cannon City, and pay immediate wages. That last act mattered most. She did not begin by buying dresses or china or any symbol a smaller imagination calls triumph. She hired the quarryman to repair the creek road. She paid a carpenter to make the cabin weathertight before snow. She funded the reopening of the machine shop under cooperative terms. She redeemed 3 families' winter fuel accounts at Mrs. Holloway's bakery and store. She sent for lumber to finish the flume spur Nathan had once measured, because water is the first employer in dry country. When the circuit judge finally arrived to review the documents, he found them sound, the county sale valid, the prior assumptions of ownership deeply suspect, and Horace Fitch's private use of unperfect claims grounds for seizure of certain bank-held parcels pending broader inquiry. Mayor Dunn resigned before he could be formally removed, citing nerves. People who had once laughed at the 50-cent cabin now tipped their hats to Mara on the street, but she did not grow vain from it. She had been poor enough to know praise can be another weather system. She kept working. By spring, Bramble Creek sang through repaired channels into garden strips below town. The old cold cellar reopened for produce. The machine shop sharpened tools and mended axles. A disused warehouse became a hiring hall where widows kept books, former teamsters managed freight, and boys too young for the mines learned honest work handling grain and tack. Mara established the Vale House Trust in Beatrice's memory and placed the largest share of the recovered assets into it, not because she despised wealth, but because she understood what wealth becomes when it belongs only to appetite. Toby had boots that fit, milk on cold mornings, and a slate for lessons at the little schoolroom Mara helped repair. She secured their future not by walling it off from others but by tying it to the town's recovery so tightly that prosperity could no longer be hoarded without public shame. As for the men who had mocked or preyed on her, karma on the frontier seldom wears thunder. More often it arrives as plain exposure. Pruitt lost tenants when people remembered too clearly the day he put a sick child's blankets in the mud. Fitch, stripped of his smooth certainties, spent his afternoons under watch sorting records for the inquiry that consumed what remained of his stature. Dunn left for Pueblo, where rumor said he tried to sell land no one wished to buy from him. Mara did not chase them, boast over them, or waste grace on speeches. She simply outlasted them, which is a colder and more enduring victory. And so let us return to the image with which we began, a 29-year-old solitary mother, a 5-year-old boy, a landlord's cruelty, a $50 held warm in a gloved palm. We are often told that worth announces itself grandly, that treasure shines, that power arrives in fine wagons and clean cuffs. But true worth, the kind that changes a life and then a town, often first appears in insulted forms, a widow no one thinks dangerous, a child carrying kindling to a broken hearth, a rotting cabin bought for 50 cents because it is all the world believes she deserves. Mara Ellison did not save Juniper Crossing by luck alone, though luck had its place. She saved it because grief had not emptied her of judgment, because devotion sharpened what despair might have dulled, because she could read wood grain, ledger marks, quilt symbols, and human character with the same steady eye. That is the quiet splendor of her story. The lost empire beneath the floor was real enough, its deeds, its silver, its roads, its water, but the deeper empire was the one she carried within reach the whole time, endurance inherited from careful people, labor given dignity, and a mother's refusal to let her child learn that the world belongs only to the cruel. 50 cents bought a cabin. Love made it a kingdom worth sharing. Remember her name, because some names deserve to be spoken like lantern light against weather. Mara Ellison, thank you for spending this time with us in Juniper Crossing and walking beside Mara through hunger, mystery, and hard-won restoration. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs reminding that what the world casts off may still be full of hidden worth. And before we part, tell us this: what is a time you found value in something others had already written off? We would love to read your answer. Until next time, stay close.